like to try to get these things kicked off on time. So we will start jumping into the presentation today. We probably will see a few more people roll in over the next few minutes, but we'll get going. And just a good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much. A lot of people have signed up today. There is a lot going on in the world. So it's a great time to stay connected and talk about all the issues on the table. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Allison Levitt. I'm the Managing Director of the Wine and Spirits Shippers Association. Been in this role for a little over 10 years and been in the international logistics arena for my whole life. And I'm also a licensed customs broker. So I thank you for joining this webinar today, and a big thank you to the WSSA team, especially Gretchen Beavert, our program manager, who helps with all the registrations and get these decks set up. We have Jillian Carpenter on the line as well. She is our CBMA guru. She will be answering some of the questions that may come up during that part of the presentation. This will be a rapid fire run through many of the hot topics affecting importers and exporters as we launch into 2024. We have a pretty aggressive agenda, and if I can get my slides to move, there we go. Whoops, sorry about that. With a series of agenda items listed here, we're going to try to get through each one quickly, but also thoroughly. If you have questions as we go along, please write them in the Q&A, and we will either try to address them as we go along, address them at the end of the webinar, or follow up with you after the webinar to provide any detailed information that you may be interested in. Really, each of these topics could use an hour on their own, so we're really touching the highlights. There's also other topics that are, say, more regionalized, whether it's the California Recycling Act or the CARB Act, certain things going on in different places, but we're trying to touch on the ones that are the most universal and affecting almost everyone in the beverage alcohol import or export industry. For the organic enforcement legislation, we are very fortunate to have Scott Rice joining us at for the second half, basically, or near the end of the presentation. He is the regulatory director of the Organic Trade Association, and I'll reintroduce him further when we get to that section. For those of you who may have no interest in organic product or what is going on the organic sector, please feel free to drop off. But again, there may be more to it than any of you realize, so I would suggest listening in to what Scott has to say. The items on the agenda point to the constantly changing environment of trade and transportation. In many ways, this is an old school industry. We rely on ships, trains, trucks, airplanes. All of these require live people to run them and are affected by global events, whether it's war or drought, legislation, politics, regulators. There's a lot of different factors. So while it may be old school, it is not static. One of our primary goals at WSSA is to keep all of our members as well informed as possible about events that impact their business. Just a little bit about WSSA, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. I think most of you have attended webinars in the past, but for new people on there, WSSA is a fairly old shippers association. We were founded back in 1976, and our founding parties were WSWA, the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association, and NABI, the National Association of Beverage Importers. They wanted to found an association that really looked after the ocean shipping and the overall landscape of imports and exports of beverage alcohol into the USA. Very, very different climate back in 1976, but that remains our primary mission, to work on competitive rates and services for our members with all of the ocean carriers. So incredibly important, whether rates are high or rates are low, whether capacity is good or bad. What we find is those relationships that we build on over the last, plus 40 years. Some of the ocean carriers that we have been working with have been the same people for the last 20 years. Relationships matter, and that remains a high priority for us as an association. Our second pillar is our risk management program. We insure over $1 billion worth of product on every mode, every country, and we tailor this policy specifically for beverage alcohol and basically offer the benefit of being in a group policy. So if you have risk impacts, you have theft of cargo, if you have other issues that are affecting your own cargo coverage, it is great to be part of a group. The final pillar is our education, advocacy, and outreach that we do for the industry when it comes to logistics and regulatory issues, exactly what we are doing today. We work closely with all of the key industry associations, both our founders, WSWA and NABI, to associations such as Discus and Women of the Vine and the California Wine Institute and the Organic Trade Association. So we are the voice of beverage alcohol for logistics and regulatory issues, and we collaborate closely with all of the other associations to share in pertinent information, and this collaboration is incredibly important for everyone in the industry. So jumping into the first topic of the day, the ETS, this is not a new thing. The European Union emissions trading system and the tax that is now going into effect. The ETS tax, I said it's not a simple thing. It is not a new thing. This is part of the overall EU climate action plan. It has been evolving and it will continue to evolve. But January 1st marks a significant change for importers in terms of the ETS tax going into effect for carriers, and thus carriers figuring out how to charge that to the shipping public. So the main thing you need to know right now is that this new tax is now in effect as of January 1st. Each ocean carrier has basically made their bet as to what the approximate assessment will be per TEU, per 20-foot equivalent unit for the various trade lanes that touch the area governed by the EU Emissions Trading System Directive. This includes all EU countries and countries within the EEA, the European Economic Area, including Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway. So there is incredible amount of information on various websites explaining exactly how the ETS will be managed, which ports and areas are included, and how it actually works. The shipping companies are required to report through a platform operated by the European Maritime Safety Agency, and the assessments on the potential tax payments will be made after the end of the reporting for each year. And this is why I say the carriers made their bet on what this tax might be, how they will be assessed, because they will not be making their first payments until approximately March of 2025. So the taxes will be assessed through 2024, but they don't know exactly how they will be paying and how much they will be paying until they actually get their first invoices. So again, it's been a little bit difficult to assess. They've made their estimates, and for now, the levels are fairly low, ranging from approximately $25 to about $125 for a 40-foot container. It is a cap and trade system, and the goal is to significantly reduce emissions. So there is a cap on the amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted by the ocean carriers. If the ocean carrier exceeds the cap, they will pay heavy fines. Thus, there's a financial incentive to reduce emissions in whatever way possible, whether it is through slow steaming or use of alternative fuels or any other methodology chosen. So I will say, if anyone wants to get the nitty-gritty details on the ETS, we would be happy to send a link to the European Commission Climate Action page. That is probably the best area where I have found for very precise and easy to follow information. So we would be happy to send a link to that, and you can run through all of the details and the FAQs. So for now, just expect to see an ETS tax on any of your ocean shipping charges that are in the EU area. Okay. Sorry, my slides are running a little. There we go. Okay. This area certainly is more complex, ongoing, a fluid situation. Everybody has heard the news from the situation in the Red Sea. And we've also been hearing all the news about how the ocean carriers are reacting. So as I said, this is kind of old news at this point, but still ongoing, and attacks even over the last 24 hours. Houthi rebels have been conducting attacks on commercial vessels in the Bab al-Mandab Strait off the coast of Yemen. Again, you might think, oh, why is this affecting me? Where is this? We put up a couple maps here so you can see that area off Yemen and the entrance into the Red Sea, and ultimately the entrance to the Suez Canal. So that area is an entry and exit point into the Red Sea. The rebels announced that they intend to attack any vessel associated with Israel due to the conflict in Gaza. However, in the past weeks, they have launched missiles and drones at various vessels, whether associated with Israel in any way or not. So the attacks have been made on container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers, and have damaged several vessels and obviously affected the transit in this area. In this type of war risk situation, carriers have every right to make decisions to protect their personnel, their vessels, and of course, the cargo on the vessels. The impact is immediate. Ocean carriers, almost all of the major ocean carriers have announced that they will avoid the Red Sea area and reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, creating transit delays approximately 10 to 23 days, depending on the route. This impact is expected to result in a combination of blank sailings, canceled sailings, basically due to the extended navigation time. Thus, the ships cannot keep their normal weekly sailing schedules, and they will cancel a sailing to restore or redesign a schedule. There's also potential for equipment shortages in certain areas due to this extended ship cycle. And again, along with those changes come costs to the carriers. Again, you may say, why is this affecting me? There is not a heck of a lot of beverage alcohol moving through the Suez Canal into the USA. Why is this going to be an impact? I think as many of you have heard, those surcharges are not just announced for cargo that is immediately in this vicinity, but expanded to cargo even coming out of Europe into the USA. So not only concerning in terms of the charges, but also what happens when there is disruption in trade. We have learned a lot from the pandemic. I think everyone can quickly recall that when there is disruption in one area, it can affect many, many other areas, and the trickle-down effect is pretty fast. I think the other important factor here is the importance of the Suez Canal. Suez plays an incredible critical role in global trade. Approximately 30% of all worldwide container traffic goes through the Suez, about $1 trillion worth of goods annually. It is the second largest economic resource for Egypt, generates $8.8 billion a year, 10% of the country's GDP, so a critical source of hard currency for Egypt. Egypt is a USA ally. The USA is certainly being pressured to help in this situation and has launched the multinational operation to safeguard commerce, Operation Prosperity Guardian. Again, this is a fluid situation. We do know there are vessels still transiting the Suez, as we see that some of these vessels have actually turned off their tracking, so we don't know exactly how many vessels are in the canal. We also have seen military action in terms of the defense from the various attacks from the Houthis. So, but it is an ongoing event, and again, impacting certainly that region. So again, what this means to you, potential surcharges. So the ocean carriers have announced surcharges, and they've labeled these in a lot of different ways, from emergency operations, contingency surcharges, rate restoration. In the USA, we have a Federal Maritime Commission. We are the only country who regulates these type of filing of surcharges, and there is a 30-day filing requirement by the Federal Maritime Commission for any such surcharges. They do have exceptions for this type of circumstance, and they have allowed many carriers permission to enact the surcharges without the 30-day notice. So if any of you do export into the Mideast region, as an example, those surcharges went into play very quickly. And the letters of permission, when the carriers go to the FMC and say, can we have a waiver of the 30-day rule, they have to file those. They're in the public domain. They can be found in the reading room section of the FMC website if you're actually curious about looking at what the FMC actually approves. So those surcharges, again, are out there for the immediately impacted area, and they are published for Europe to USA for many carriers. But as said, this is fluid. We've seen some postponement of surcharges. We've seen changes in what the charge is going to be. We've seen some cancellations. So again, it's one of those things we're keeping an eye on. But if you ship from Europe, you should be aware of this potential, and the amounts are significant. I also serve on the FMC National Shippers Advisory Committee, and one of the subcommittees I serve on is the Fees and Subcharges Subcommittee. So these are the type of things our committee looks at on a daily basis. We've had a few quick conference calls talking about this situation. One of my colleagues on the committee did a quick study of the actual costs, as well as the savings of the toll fees and whatnot for not going through the Suez Canal. The estimate on one of the reroutes for the additional cost was about $900,000 for a 9,000 TEU vessel. So this would translate to about $100 per TEU of additional costs. The surcharges that have been published are far in excess of that. And even on those Europe to USA surcharges, we've seen, from $500 per TEU as high as $1,500 on a 40-foot container. So our question as an association and as an industry is, is this fair? Does this comply with OSRA? Lars Jensen, one of the top analysts in the ocean shipping world, head of Vespucci Maritime, he published a recent op-ed basically saying, no, this is not fair. The surcharges exceed the costs and make these charges a new profit center. So for sure, as an association and as a member of the NSAC, we will be questioning the reasonable nature of these surcharges, monitoring them, pressuring the carriers to be reasonable in their treatment. And that is definitely something that we are very concerned with, and the industry is very concerned with. So for now, fluid situation, we will keep you as closely advised as possible on the changes. So next area of concern, one thing after another. It's a little bit different, obviously. This is not an area that is suffering violence, but is suffering under climate change conditions of severe drought. As you can see by the information on this slide, the levels in the Panama Canal are approximately 2 meters, about 6 feet lower than normal. So each transit through the canal goes through a series of locks and consumes a lot of water. They need water. They've gone through the rainy season with very little rain, and October was the driest October ever on record in Panama. So with low water situation, the canal authorities must either limit transit vessels or reduce the draft of the ship, reducing the amount of containers per vessel. This has been an ongoing situation really since July. We've been in a very drought restriction situation. And since July until now, we have not seen any surcharges going into play. And this really speaks to the fact that cargo volumes have been very low. As all of you know, since post-pandemic, where really cargo volumes fell off a cliff coming from the Transpac trades, and really almost on a global basis, there was an extreme, shall we say, drought in cargo. There hasn't been that big an issue with this low water situation. However, at this point, we are seeing the carriers announce surcharges, and it's another area that we will be monitoring. So the normal vessel transit in both locks of the canal, there's the original locks, and then there was what we call the Neo-Panamax locks that accommodate the larger vessels. The normal transit for both locks is 32 vessels a day. It was reduced to 25 in November and 22 in December. There was some rain in the last month or so, and January transits actually moved up to 24. So it was the planned reduction was to go down to 18. We're up to 24. So that's good news in terms of the transits on the canal. So what we have seen in terms of the beverage alcohol industry, most of the vessels are using the smaller locks. The smaller locks do accommodate more vessels per day, but we have seen issues on transshipment points. So especially say coming out of South America, hitting Panama as a transshipment point, we have seen 1, 2, and 3 week delays in those transshipment points as due to vessel delays, some congestion getting into the canal. And again, it just shows that whenever disruption happens, there's trickle down in various areas, and different carriers handle it better than others as well. So anyway, the surcharges have been put out there. They are at least labeled as Panama Canal emergency surcharges or low water surcharges. They're actually at a more reasonable level than what we're seeing in some of, obviously, the Red Sea situation, about $80 to $150 per TEU. But in terms of looking at your budgets and looking at what's happening in the shipping front, despite the fact that ocean freight rates have gone to a very, very low level, you will have to look at these 3 issues: the ETS tax, Panama Canal surcharge if you transit the canal, and potentially a Red Sea surcharge if indeed the carriers impose it on the beverage alcohol trade lanes. Okay, we're going to move a little bit away from surcharges, although this particular issue certainly impacts surcharges and impacts carrier behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 and where we stand in 2024. So maritime shipping law is very old, dates back to the 1800s with only a few revisions over the years. OSRA 22 was a big deal, a first revision since 1998. And it came out of basically the perception, and I would say the reality, of the unreasonable behavior of the ocean carriers during the pandemic in terms of a few different areas. It was really driven by U.S. agriculture exports who were being refused booking. So you're a almond exporter out of California and your ocean carrier is telling you, nope, no bookings for the next 3 weeks. We're not giving you any containers, not giving you any slots. And we're just taking all these empty containers back to Asia because we can make $20,000 per container to bring them back in with consumer goods. So of course, that affected the ag industry enormously. It also affected almost everyone in shipping. I'm sure every single one of you were impacted during the pandemic supply chain disruption, with especially demurrage and detention. So the fact that you couldn't get containers out of terminals, you couldn't return empty containers back to terminals. There were millions and millions of dollars paid out for demurrage and detention due to this disruption, not due to any fault of you as a importer or exporter. So this led to quite a bit of public outcry, led to congressional action, and we got OSRA 22. It was a big piece of legislation. There's a lot in it. And one of the most important factors, I think, that has come from OSRA 22 is a change in the authority of the FMC and really a paradigm shift, turning the Federal Maritime Commission into more of a consumer protection agency instead of an agency protecting the ocean carriers. I would say FMC just would, previously would almost rubber stamp anything the ocean carriers wanted and really wasn't looking out for the shipping public. That has really been a big shift from the FMC. I think the other thing to just understand about the Federal Maritime Commission, it's a government agency consisting of 5 individuals and a lot of staff, but not a huge staff, but 5 individual commissioners who all have their own agendas and are also all political appointees. So as we enter into 2024, an election year, they're all sitting there wondering, whether they're going to have their job after the next election, what their position might be. Will the chairman remain the chairman? Will things shuffle around? So again, there's politics that are involved in this agency as well. The only items I really want to talk about with OSRA 22, there's a lot of items in there, but detention and demurrage is really the one I think that affects everybody and has been, even before the pandemic, was a big problem. Prior to the supply chain crisis and OSRA 2022, Commissioner Rebecca Dye, one of the FMC commissioners, spent a lot of time investigating demurrage and detention and wrote up a very long document in terms of how reasonable practices by ocean carriers, terminals, et cetera. That document was actually codified in OSRA 22. So bringing all the work that she did pre-pandemic and making it into law, giving the FMC actual authority to act on unreasonable practices of demurrage and detention. So this slide just kind of points out what is demurrage and detention for, and when it is not used as intended, it would be considered unreasonable. One of the things that was part of OSRA 22 was that now that they have this rule and it's been codified in terms of how demurrage and detention should be considered, how do we actually make it work? And I think that with any legislation, that it may be passed and it may be effective the day it's passed, but it can take years to actually put in the mechanism to make the law work. Any of you who are involved in CBMA, the Craft Beverage Modernization Act, certainly can understand this. CBMA was passed as part of the Trump Tax Cuts and Job Act. It went into effect in 2018. We are now in 2023 with a whole new CBMA system. And so it takes years sometimes to actually put the correct pieces in place to make legislation work. I do think that's going to be what happens with OSRA 22, especially when it comes to demurrage and detention rulings. So the notice of proposed rulemaking was issued. This basically tried to further define how D&D, demurrage and detention, should work, expanding the scope to marine terminals, advising on what they would like to see on invoices, defining prohibited practices, clarifying which parties should be billed. The proposed rule was quite long, and the rulemaking had probably more comments on it than I've ever seen on a rulemaking. Over 185 comments came in from the shipping public, from ocean steamship lines to truckers to other associations. Everybody had an opinion, and some of these comments were, 5 to like 25 pages long. So in all reality, we should have this rule done. The FMC should have taken in all these comments and reacted, but I can clearly see why they are struggling with this. It is very, very complex. And these the three items on the screen are just some of the three most controversial and most difficult items to define and put in a solid practice. The invoice party is an interesting one. What the proposed rulemaking really focuses on the privity of contract concept, meaning the person who owns that, say, ocean freight contract, and that could be us at WSSA, it could be a freight forwarder, it could be you as a shipper. That person who actually is the contract holder would be the only party who should be billed for any demurrage and detention. In all reality, that doesn't really work. I'm sure many of you may buy with different terms of sale and say you're buying from an overseas supplier who owns the contract for the freight portion, gets that container, say, to the Port of New York, and it gets to New York, you are responsible as the importer of record to clear customs, pick it up a terminal, get it to a warehouse. Yet if privity of contract was in place, if there was demurrage on that container, say you didn't get it cleared on time or you had an issue picking it up, the contract holder would be the one billed for demurrage. It really doesn't make sense. So they're really struggling to work through how the invoice party should work. Timeframes is another one. The current proposal offers a 30-30-30 timeframe, 30 days from time of event to bill any demurrage and detention, 30 days to issue any dispute, and 30 days to resolve. So again, many people have said this doesn't make sense for a variety of reasons, and it also doesn't provide, the rule does not outline what the path is to resolution. There are plenty of disputes out there that either they might get mitigated, they might get thrown out, but right now there is not a clear path as to who actually is the party that will resolve those. There is a claims process that the FMC has, but this rule has a long way to go in terms of really defining that. Jurisdiction is another thing, and this is something I've learned through the NSEC and working on this rule and digging into the jurisdiction piece. The jurisdiction I'm talking about here is on through bills of lading where a railroad is also involved in the process. What I have learned is that the railroads are very powerful. Nobody wants to mess with the railroads, and so the idea of who actually has jurisdiction over that piece when a container may get to a railhead, say it's gone from New York to Chicago, and it's going to be delivered from Chicago onto a final delivery in Elk Grove Village. And you get 2 days of free time at that railhead, but your carrier, it's a through bill of lading, the ocean carrier is responsible for that. The FMC says that they do not have jurisdiction over the railroads. Surface Transportation Board, STB, says they don't have a jurisdiction. So that piece of D&D at the railroads is very problematic. So those are the things that are really, on the plate right now for OSRA 22. We are keeping a close eye on it, waiting on that final rule. In the meantime, we are certainly here to help with any claims that you might have, any disputes, anything you want to talk to us about in terms of, does this fall under OSRA 22? Should we make a claim? There is a claims process, and we'd be happy to help and guide on any of that. Okay, couple other quick things for trade, the ILA East Coast labor contract. This is another potential disruptor. As many of you know who have West Coast cargo, you probably know that we actually don't have a signed contract for the US West Coast ILWU labor. So that contract expired, oh gosh, it's almost 2 years ago now. The West Coast labor worked through the contract negotiation period. They did not strike. They did not slow down. There were some disruptions here and there, but ultimately they worked through their contract period, even during, like I said, having over a year of having a contract not signed. They have agreed on all points, and that contract will be signed in the fairly near future. So not too worried about the ILWU situation, but until it's signed and sealed, you never know. We're now looking at the East Coast. So the International Longshoremen's Association, the East Coast labor has always prided themselves on not disrupting workflows on the East Coast. They have benefited from this enormously. The West Coast has lost a lot of cargo volume to the East Coast, and the East Coast has always been this calm and reliable place in terms of labor. For I think even about a year ago, less than a year ago, the ILA was saying, oh yeah, we're going to get this contract done and signed before expiration. Don't worry. However, in the last few months, there's been a lot of fiery talk about the fact that they may indeed do some work stoppages or potential strikes if they don't get what they want. The ILWU contract was negotiated during a period of heavy cargo volume and high carrier profits. We are in a very, very different landscape right now in terms of both cargo volumes and rates. So the ILA does not perhaps have such a strong position, and they want to make sure that they get the same pay and benefits as the ILWU. So my feeling is that ComHeads will prevail and we will not be in a strike situation. I do think that pride of the ILA in terms of not having work stoppages and knowing the advantages they've had will play out, but we're keeping a close eye on it, and it's just something to be aware of. September seems like a long way away, but if they are not getting what they want over the next months, the negotiation process will start. We could potentially see some disruption. All right. CBMA 2024. Again, we're running through these various topics pretty quickly. As I mentioned before, we are in a very, very different position with the Craft Beverage Modernization Act compared to when we started back in 2018. And as most of you know who are involved in CBMA, that time period when it was first passed was very, very problematic. The law was passed and importers were taken by surprise. Honestly, nobody really expected the importers of foreign product to be included in this law. So it has been a big benefit as importers have learned how to take advantage of the law and use the CBMA law to gain a lot of reductions in tax payments. So here we are. In 2024, we are 1 year into the major change of the law on January 1st, 2023. At that point, the TTB completely took over administration, and that the fact that TTB took over administration really was due to the fact that CBP, the U.S. Customs Service, never could fully manage CBMA. They never put the systems together. They didn't have the resources, and when we worked very hard to get CBMA permanent, the compromise was that TTB would take over. The second compromise was that all of the normal taxes would be paid at time of entry, and importers or through their third parties would apply for refunds at the end of each quarter. I will say TTB had 2 years to put this program together. We were a little worried near the end where we didn't have the portals launched until very late in the game, but both the foreign producer portal and the importer claims portal have worked extremely well. The flow of data from customs into TTB has worked extremely well. So really better than expected in terms of the results in 2023. And we are now in the second year, and there's been a few really relatively small issues that we have put up on the screen. I'm just going to mention the top two. I would say these are two of the areas where we see the most difficulty. When you have a problem getting actually access to your claims account, whether you don't have information on who the key contact is, whether the account was set up incorrectly. This is the area where we have seen the fix take a couple months. TTB has to get involved if you're really struggling to get your claims account set up. And so it's something that is probably the most problematic area in terms of if there is an initial problem with that claims account, getting it fixed is not necessarily easy. Again, if you have issues there, let us know. Jillian, who's on the line with us, has done a lot of troubleshooting in this area and can work directly with TTB to assist on any account issues. The other item that I'd say causes some of the most disruption is if there is a duplicate foreign producer registration. So if you are using a third party or acting as agent for your foreign producers and registering them, and then the foreign producer, for whatever reason, decides to go in and register themselves, this creates a duplicate and can delete the old registration and create problems for any claims that are already filed. So if you are doing registration for your producers, just make sure that the producer knows that and doesn't go in and do a duplicate. Some of these other issues, withdrawals from bonded entries, some of the manual claims have some input errors or data errors. These are fairly small issues, but if you are seeing any problems with your filings or any other issues, please let us know, and we would be more than happy to help guide you and connect you with TTB, the right people at TTB if necessary. As we just get into a couple reminders, for 2023, the assignments are now closed. This is an area that we would like to see changed. I think for some of you, your foreign producers do not give you assignments to the end of the year. They may want to actually assess all of their volumes for the year and then assign at the very end. That is how some producers work, and we can get into a fairly short window. We would like to see the ability to assign for the previous year extended a little further. So that's something that we will be working on. But as of now, if you have imports in 2023 that you think are eligible, but you don't have that assignment, you are currently out of luck. For 2024, the assignments are open. They open up in October and eligible through the end of December. So get those foreign producers to put their assignments in the system as soon as possible, so you can get those claims done. The other item that just to take note of, that if you do have ownership changes in your company, make sure you do update those in the portal as quickly as possible and within 6 months of the change. And the only other thing I want to add on CBMA is for the wholesalers out there, the distributor tier. This tier is probably the tier that has the most difficulty in getting access to CBMA benefits. I will say to you, don't give up. Take a look at your producers, talk to your producers. If you want us to do any assessments on whether we think you could have CBMA eligibility, we have done a lot of this with distributors, working through their entire list of producers, seeing where they might get benefits. And you could potentially save, a couple $100,000, $500,000 on taxes by getting some allocations that perhaps you did not think you were eligible for. This is money on the table, and don't neglect it. Okay, we are going to jump to the strengthening organic enforcement law. As mentioned, I'm very, very happy to have Scott Rice joining us today to talk about this situation. Scott has a lot of experience in the organic world, and he's currently the regulatory director of the Organic Trade Association. As you can see from this really brief excerpt from his bio, he has deep experience in certification and in-depth knowledge of all issues relating to organic standards. We're going to talk a little bit, just one slide on the basics of the law, and then turn it over to Scott in terms of just walking you all through exactly what you need to do. Well, not exactly perhaps, because this is a work in progress. He will talk about that as well, but address the issues that are confronting importers. I think the one thing that I will say, and maybe is similar to CBMA, when this regulation came out from USDA, it was a bit of a surprise to importers of finished products. And initially we had conflicting answers from the USDA as to whether it would apply to importers of basically finished products that are ready for resale. And it has now been made very clear that all importers will be subject to this regulation, that importing is considered handling, and the clock is ticking in terms of getting certification. So Scott is going to kind of run us through the process, and I'm very happy to have Scott here, and I will be putting up his slides for him. And Scott, I'm turning it over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Allison. Thanks to you and Jillian and Gretchen and WSSA for having me here this morning. Pleasure to join you all. Real quick background on the Organic Trade Association. As you see here, we were founded in 1985, and we work with, we are now the voice of the $67 billion industry that organic has become, representing more than 10,000 businesses from across 50 states through our membership and our Farmer Advisory Council. Next slide there. We work for our members. That's what we're here for. Political advocacy, regulatory expertise, science and research, technical assistance, promoting those organic goods. And we also do a lot of work in market data. We're just finishing up an exciting new study looking at some international markets as well as the domestic market here and recognition of the USDA organic label in those. Next slide there. So as Allison mentioned, the implementation of SOE, which comes into enforcement on the 19th of March, electronic import certificates will be required for all imported products, regardless of their origin or how they're packaged. It also requires certification of all exporters and importers of organic product, regardless of, regardless of that packaging. So who has to be certified? As you can see here, the definition of what constitutes handling has been, it's been expanded by SOE. So effectively, what we're looking at is the entire supply chain. Next slide. And we put together this little graphic here to kind of show where certification is required and where areas of it it's required situationally, depending on packaging. We'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute, but essentially, again, the entire supply chain is subject to certification. This is the biggest overhaul of the rule since it was written about 20 years ago. It came about as from several factors and largely in response to some pretty high profile fraud cases that we saw in our industry, namely organic grain or grain coming from Europe, conventional grain fraudulently sold as organic into our market. We got some authority in the 2018 Farm Bill, recommendations from the National Organic Standards Board, as well as work from the National Organic Program at USDA, all culminating in the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule, which was released about a year ago in January. So it's adding those requirements to further prevent and identify fraud across that supply chain. Next slide. So SOE requires all but a narrow set of exemption of entities to be certified. As you can see here, organic exporters to the US must be certified as they are the exporter of the product and must have their certifier approve and generate import certificates. We'll talk about that process of how that works in a moment. Organic importers must be certified as they're importing the product and must verify its integrity. They're also going to be checking that the import matches those import certificates. Next slide. Taking a look at who is exempt, we've got licensed customs brokers, logistics brokers, freight forwarders that do not conduct any other handling. They are exempt, but just keeping in mind any entity conducting any other handling, which includes selling, importing, trading, they must be certified. Entities that receive, store, and or prepare for shipment products that remain in sealed, tamper-evident packaging, retail or otherwise, are exempt from certification, but you must keep records of those transactions. So this would be perhaps further down your supply chain. Again, still importers are subject to that. One thing to note, when we talk about things like bottled spirits and wine, those are considered tamper-evident packaging. And so those would, even if you're breaking into a case, the bottles themselves are still considered that sealed tamper-evident packaging and would still allow you to be in that exemption zone there. Entities that transport or transload product, they're exempt from certification, again, providing that those companies are not engaged in any other handling of organic product, such as combining, containerizing, the rest of what you see here, particularly labeling. I guess one thing to keep in mind on that, if you are handling bulk wine and bottling and labeling that, that would be considered a handling practice. That's actually something that would be viewed as handling under the current regulation. So hopefully that's not a surprise to any of you, and you'd be subject to certification on that front for those activities already. Next slide. Taking a moment to look at the labeling of non-retail containers as SOE addresses this. Non-retail containers used to ship or store certified product, it must have clear identification of the product as organic. Organic must be included on all import documents, including but not limited to those invoices, packing lists, bills of lading, CBP entry data. The information must include production lot numbers, shipping IDs, or other information, unique information that links that particular container to that audit trail documentation. And the audit trail documentation must identify that last certified operation that handled the product. Next slide there. Taking a look at the kind of flow and process of how this works in the origin country, preparing a shipment for export, that exporter will send that data, that export data, to their certifier and request an NOP import certificate. The exporter must identify those products, again, as organic on all of that documentation. The certifier will be either directly USDA accredited or accredited by another government under a trade agreement, such as we have with the EU and other countries and areas. They will verify the shipment is compliant and then issue that NOP import certificate from what we call the USDA Organic Integrity Database, or OID for short. This is the USDA's database of all of their certified operations under the USDA regulation, as well as all the certifiers. They've been working pretty hard to populate that with all of our trading partners abroad in advance of that March 19th date. So that's the module within the OID will be generating those certificates, each of which has its own unique identification number. The certifier will electronically transfer that data to the exporter, who can then transfer that electronically to the importer in the US. And perhaps unlike some other flows that we've seen, the physical copies are not required. We can keep it electronic on this, which is handy. Next slide, please.
And I will say there's a lot of questions coming in, so we're gonna save them
Okay.
to the end. But one of the repeat questions from a couple people have just said, if I import organic product, do I have to be certified? And that answer is yes. So we'll get to some of the more complex ones if we can at the end. But I'll let Scott keep moving here, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
Great. Yeah, I'm almost done here because I knew there would probably be some questions, so appreciate that. So looking at, in the certification world, as in a lot of other areas of regulation, documentation, verification, that's what kind of runs the day. So in terms of that verification step, the importer will verify the compliance of the import, including that there's a valid import certificate associated with it. And they are a customs broker, uploads that data into the CBP ACE, and then the importer will identify, again, all those products as organic on the supporting documentation. That importer must have a control system in place to verify that each shipment has had no contact with prohibited substances or exposure to ionizing radiation. Those are all practices that are prohibited under the regulation. Probably not as pertinent to this crowd as you're dealing with sealed contained products. Looking at what happens with all this data, again, entered into the ACE system and used by NOP to verify validity of certificates, tracking shipment quantities, conducting traceability investigations. Again, the real thrust of SOE was to crack down on that and detect more proactively fraud and stop that kind of from entering the market to begin with. As with a lot of documentation in the certification system, maintaining those records for review at inspection is very important. And I think moving to the last slide here, again, at inspection of the exporter's certifier, or rather the exporter, it would be the exporter certifier looking for that documentation. Similarly, at the importer's annual inspection, the importer certifier will be taking a look at that. One thing to note here, the regulation allows for certifiers to issue NOP import certificates to cover either a period of time or a quantity of product. The period of time or that quantity will be determined by the certifier using their risk assessment tool that they're required to have, and applying that to your particular product. So that would mean you would not have to request an import certificate for each and every transaction or shipment that you've got going. And that'll be something that you work through with your certifier. It's recognized that, say, at the time of bottling, there isn't a super solid idea of exactly how much will be produced in that. And again, that will just allow for the flexibility of not having to have that particular or specific certificate for each and every transaction. So as many of you are realizing, you're subject to certification, and what now? Well, March 19th is 68 days away, and including weekends and holidays. So it takes on average 90 days to obtain certification. So now is the time to reach out and determine what certifier is going to work for you. There is in that organic integrity database is a certifier locator of all of the USDA accredited certifiers here and abroad. You can use that to help you find a certifier that's a good fit for you. When looking for them, I would say look for one that is familiar with the import process and they understand your business. You understand their timelines, especially when it comes to requiring those import certificates, and as best you can determine their capacity for what those turnarounds look like, and that will work for your business.
One of the questions I'll just interrupt was, do we
Sure,
have
please.
recommendations for certifiers? And we will send out a couple that we know are working with wine and spirits companies, because I think that is important so that they understand the actual business that you are all in. So we will be happy to provide that. And I think another, another question that has come up from a few people is that the site inspections. I mean, some importers literally are working out of their homes, working out of an office with a couple people. They aren't even near the product. We have not yet seen shall we say, waiver of inspections, but and I think, Scott, does that hold true for what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think what that was one of my last points here is, what does that inspection look like? And we recognize in the certification world, there are those home offices. You may not have a warehouse, you may not be touching this product, but it is still, there is language in the USDA regulation, has been since its inception, that initial applications for certification must have an on-site inspection. Now, there were systems that were put into place during COVID to allow for socially distanced inspections for continuing certification, but NOP, because this was written into the law, did not allow variances or exceptions for not having those initial on-site inspections. So it's going to be a review of records. It will be you sitting down with an inspector, going over those transactions and how that flow of your product works. I know it seems a little wonky that you would have to do this in person and not via Zoom or whatnot, but it's the law that we're working with now. And, we'll see how that goes moving forward, if there's room for revisiting that at some time. But in choosing your inspector, or rather your certifier, that would be another factor to consider, is where that inspector is coming from, if they're not in your local area, because that will of course add expense to the cost of certification. So just keeping those factors in mind. That was my top line. I'm happy to dive into these questions a little more.
Yeah, I'll weed through a few of them. Like I said, we've got about 5 minutes left, so we probably won't be able to touch on everything. But then the ones that are really a little more detailed, we will probably get back to you via email with more specific answers. So we'll kind of touch the general ones. And this is, Scott and I had talked about this a couple of days ago in terms of the 3PL warehouses. And I think, Scott, you mentioned that before, that if it's just warehousing and they are not actually, relabeling anything, even if they are, say, taking out a few bottles from a case to ship to a retail location, they will not need to be certified, as I understand it. Is that correct, Scott?
Correct. As long as that company is not engaging in the buying and selling, trading of that product. If they are simply handle or moving it through, storing it, that is our read at this time. Yeah.
There's a couple other kind of that I would say are similar questions, in terms of, one is this only for import from Europe? And no, it's for import from anywhere. But the one area, and this was a question in terms of, does it include domestic? If you are a distributor and you bring in California organic wine and you're not importing that, and you're just, moving it from California into your warehouse, that is not subject to this certification. So importing is the factor in terms of the certification. Is that also, would you say, correct, Scott?
Yeah, importing is the factor, but the buying and selling aspect of this is also a factor of certification. So
if you're buying California organic wine, you would then be subject to this.
That is, yes, that is our
okay. Then my interpretation was wrong. I'm sorry. So if you are indeed buying any organic product, whether you're importing it or buying it domestically,
the buying and selling is what is in the handling definition in this updated regulation. It is clarified that buying and selling is a handling activity. That's something that we can, drill down on a little more if need be. But that is our read there.
Okay.
Go
ahead if you were going to. No, I just said that's I think I didn't have the right information on that one. So again, we all learn on these conversations, but it's definitely something, as I said, it is a work in progress. And I think that speaks to, one of the questions on here is, what will happen if I'm not certified on March 19th? Yeah. Is there going to be some flexibility here? And that is probably one of the top conversations that's ongoing. So Scott, I'll let you answer that.
Thanks. Yeah, that was another point I had here to cover. We've been hardened by NOP, the National Organic Program's stance that, this is less an event than it is a process. And while March 19th is the enforcement date, they understand that the systems are still being put in place, that people are still in the discovery mode of finding that they are subject to certification. So I think they'll be kind of leading with a carrot more than a stick, with education more than that hard enforcement. You'll see that from certifiers as well, as they conduct their inspections and perhaps find entities that in their audits that are subject to certification, and issuing letters of information, really more than USDA issuing non-compliance or kind of nasty grants, if you will. It's more of a looking to be more educational in the initial parts of this. So if you're doing your due diligence and moving in that direction. We probably important to imports as well. The big question is, well, what happens if there's an uncertified importer working and handling the product? USDA still does not have stop sale authority. So I think this again will be something that may come up in audits after the fact, but initially, I think we can be confident that we will not have huge disruption of product coming in.
That's good to hear. And I think, that feeling is that if you're, in the process of getting certified, if you're taking the right steps, hopefully there will be some flexibility, but I don't think we have a clear answer on that yet. So there's certainly pressure on the USDA coming from various industries, but to have some flexibility of that startup date. There's again, we're right about 2:00, and there's quite a few questions here. So we can try to address a couple more quickly for anyone who does want to stay on the line. And as said, anything we don't get to, we'll send out individual emails. There was one regarding cases of DI, direct import shipment. If you are the importer of record, then yes, indeed, you're the one that has to be certified. I think there's another question that applies that I will pose to Scott, because I don't know the answer at all on this one. If you have multiple locations, and maybe you have you've got imports coming into multiple locations, but you also have multiple sites. Maybe you have a West Coast site and an East Coast site. Would both of those sites or offices have to be inspected as part of the certification process, or would it just be the head office, or how do you think that will work?
Sure. If we're talking about offices and not handling facilities, then one office, I would say, is what would be reviewed, what would be inspected. If you've got handling facilities that are labeling or doing any sort of further processing, whatnot, those facilities would be subject to individual certification and inspection. But as an importer, even if you have two offices, it's going to be your primary place of business that inspection would take place.
And in terms of the methodology for customs to see if an importer is certified, do you know if there's going to be a particular certification number that would be sent through ACE?
There should be visibility on that. We just recently got what that import certificate, kind of those data fields look like, and there'll be indicators. It should be apparent in that documentation of indicating whether it's organic and how to reflect that.
Okay, so I think, again, that's probably a little bit of a work in progress as and I think what we see with customs, and we can go back to CBMA as well, what they will put in for data fields may evolve as well. So we can check on terms of what, as you said, what the visibility is, and what customs brokers are getting from the software providers in terms of the indicator fields. All right, I think what we'll do is just see if there's one more quick one.
And I'm very happy to kind of field some of these with you after the fact here, and we can touch base on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be, because there's quite a few that we have not gotten to, and I think what will be best is if we take some of these questions, we've got them all recorded here, and we will put out kind of an FAQ document to everyone on this webinar, addressing all of the questions that are on here. Otherwise, we will be on here for another hour or so as I scroll through these. So obviously there is a lot of questions surrounding this issue. And what we can do is that after we do this type of FAQ response for everyone, if we need to do another session, we can certainly set that up specifically for this topic. I knew there would be questions. I don't think I expected this many. So that's in a way good news, that we now see what a big issue this is and how new this is for importers. So we will certainly address this, but absolutely, I'd say, one of the questions was, should we get certified now? If you are an importer of organic product, you absolutely need to start this process. The clock is ticking. And like I said, probably one of the first things that will be helpful for you is for us to get out a couple recommendations. So just for the sake of staying on time, we will end this webinar. We will get back on all of these questions and really appreciate everyone's attendance. And we may indeed be launching another specific webinar just for this product in a couple weeks to get back to this. So thank you so much. And thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, we will probably be dragging you back into another one in the near future.
Okay.
And again, appreciate all the team here for setting this up and appreciate all of you for attending, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.